Regular City Council meeting. At this time, I'd like Trish to go ahead and call the roll.
Okay. Alderman Santee,
Here.
Alderman Glab,
Here.
Alderman Schaefer.
There he is.
Okay, Alderman Harding,
Here.
Alderman Mahivic,
Here.
Alderman Devine,
Here.
Alderwoman Miller,
Here.
Mayor Jett.
Here. Please stand for the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, we're going to go ahead and get started on public comment. This is for items that are not on the agenda this evening. You have 3 minutes. I would like to open it up for the public at this time. If you'd like to speak, I would ask that you would unmute yourself and you can go ahead and have the floor. And please state your name and address for public record if you wouldn't mind.
Heather, I'll go first. Oh, go ahead, Keith.
No, okay. This is Keith Varkalis, 2007 Birch Lane here in McHenry. As I know, many of you were on the call with Continental last Wednesday, and I do understand you were unable to speak because it was not a public meeting. Many of the residents had some very good questions for Continental, and it seemed like they were unable to answer them. What do you think of Continental's, not being able to answer those questions for us? And everything was, we'll get back to you. Any comments from the aldermen or women that were on the call or the mayor?
Honestly, Keith, this is not an open forum to have a conversation like that, especially when we don't even have an open proposal filed with the city of McHenry. But this is not usually we never respond to public comment. Last meeting, I, however, did to some of the questions that you guys have raised. But this is not the open forum to be doing that. So I apologize, but you are more welcome to make a public comment, your frustrations, and then hopefully when we get to that stage where you have that opportunity to give your public input and have responses, that would be at public planning and zoning, and then city council if it ever goes that way.
So when will we have that opportunity to ask you that question where you are able to answer it?
Until there's a proposal in our hands, there's nothing right now. That's where we stand. We really do not have a formal proposal in our hands at the city of McHenry.
Okay, well, okay, I will accept that and not argue that. Then I would just hope that the city council and the other workers within the city do take note that during that meeting, Continental was unable to answer many of the questions. A lot of the questions, we asked them the questions, we were not attacking them. So I hope that all of you take that into consideration, that it appears to myself and to other neighbors that were on that meeting that they were hiding answers to those questions. I know one thing, they mentioned they were going to do background checks. A very valid question of what would negate somebody from being able to rent there. He could not answer that question. So if you're going to state you're going to have background checks, wouldn't you have some parameters you could share on those? It was just one of the many questions that were ignored during that meeting. And I know you understand we don't want an apartment complex there. We understand someone owns the property, somebody can build on the property, but again, let's put what belongs there. I don't know if Alderwoman Miller has ever had a customer say they like a house, they don't want the house because there's an apartment complex next to it. Maybe that's something you can think of. Many years ago, we were going to sell our house to move to a different area. I was told that they liked my house, didn't like the fact, thanks Vic, that they didn't know what was going next to me in the field. So please take into consideration the comments that or the questions we asked Continental and how they were unable to answer them. All right, Vic, I will now mute myself. Thank you for letting me know.
Thank you, Keith. Next person to give a public comment.
Hi there, this is Christy Reinhard.
Yes.
I live at 3304 Almond Lane. And just for the record, I know last time it was spelled wrong and I didn't get back to you guys. My last name is spelled Reinhard as in dog. And I just want to second, a lot of what Keith said. You guys already know how we feel about this project. And again, I want to be clear with regard to this proposal. It is this particular proposal, the 288 apartments. We are not opposed to development. We know that that's, something that's going to happen, particularly to development of single family homes, which you guys originally had planned for some years ago. And that's kind of ready. It's the easiest and the best path of least resistance, if you will, with regard to the sewer and water and the utilities already being there. So again, I just wanted to make that clear that there is a difference here. It's not that we're opposed to development. We're opposed to this proposal with the apartments. They're not owner occupied. They don't have a vested interest in the property. It's more of a temporary thing for them. And, everybody knows that with apartments, sometimes the interest to keep it clean and be invested in the community is just not there. So thank you again for taking our comments, and have a good evening.
Thank you, Christine. Any others that would like to make a public comment? One last chance. Is anyone else willing to give a public
Sure.
comment at this time?
Can you hear me?
Patrick Kane, the floor is yours. Go ahead.
Yeah, my name is Patrick Kane. I'm 2002 Birch Lane in McHenry. My comment, I always expected that our roads were going to run through someday. There would be residential. My concern is that with 288 units, it almost seems like it needs two Blake Boulevards to get in and out of the property. And I'm just concerned that they'll try to use our residential streets as their main ingress and egress out of their properties. I'm wondering what kind of engineering study might be think of doing. What is the capacity of Blake Road and how many residents could it handle? I guess that is my major concern, but thank you very much.
Thank you, Patrick. Appreciate it. Any other comments by the public?
Hello, this is Daryl Matthews.
Yes, Daryl, the floor is yours. Go ahead.
I'm at 1910 Birch, my wife and I, Marcy. We've been here 20 years. And it's just a nice, quiet neighborhood. And all they can see coming is traffic flying up and down the road. I know you don't take this probably too serious, but it's really
concern for us. It's a huge concern.
Is that all you had? I just want to make sure. You kind of broke up at the end. Okay, anyone else for public comment at this time?
Yeah, I would like to say something. My name is Karen Jakoviak. I live on Redwood Lane, 1718 Redwood Lane. I also want to say that we are very much opposed to the building of these apartment complexes. My family has lived in McHenry for over 40 years, and I am all for building McHenry up, but this apartment complex in our little neighborhood is not the place for it. And I really hope that you listen to us and take what we have to say into consideration when you do go forward with this. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. Anyone else have a public comment? If so, please unmute yourself. Last chance for public comment.
don't mind. This is Daryl Matthews again. I've been
Yes,
in this
Daryl.
neighborhood 20 years. Could you please let me finish what I was trying to say, if you don't mind?
Daryl, you were breaking up. We couldn't hear you, and honestly, we can't even hear you too well right now.
Can you hear me now?
There you go.
really bad old commercial, but okay. We've been here 20 years. We do kind of have a voice in this neighborhood. My neighbor across the street, Betty, she's 90 years old. It's a very quiet neighborhood, and I know you guys want to bring in new real estate. I get that, and I understand that. And the thing is, I just don't want a road cutting through our neighborhood that is going to, make those kind of adjustments. I understand, 288 new apartments. I mean, that's another 300 families. I mean, it's getting kind of congested already, don't you think? Your opinion?
Daryl, obviously, like I said before, this is not an open forum to have that conversation.
It is an open forum. That's why we're here. It's an open forum.
No,
We're
this-
here to talk to you about what's going on.
Daryl, we understand that, but there is a process. This is a public comment portion of the meeting. So if you would like to have questions, and I'll have Ross speak just because I think
Well, if we really can't talk to you directly about what's going on, why are we here?
Daryl, we haven't even got an actual proposal yet from the developer. So really, we decided to bring this forward to the public and to the council as a discussion item a couple weeks ago or a month ago at this point. And just to have that conversation to get people's input, more of the council's input. And then once it goes to planning and zoning, you'll have that opportunity to make it very public to the commission of the planning and zoning. And if it goes to the direction of the council, then the council, you'll have that opportunity as well to speak your mind to the city council for final approval. So you'll have multiple opportunities but this is not the open forum to have that as a public comment portion of the meeting, especially when the item is on the agenda.
Well, I appreciate you being here, to listen to our
Sure.
our feelings about the whole thing, but just obviously you can already understand that we're not opposed, we're all opposed to what's going on, and it's really, well, obviously we're going to, when the appropriate time comes available, we're going to also disagree again, but just so you know, it's just not a really good idea, it's just.
Sure. You'll
But I do appreciate you being here for us. Thank you
Sure.
very much.
Thank you, Daryl. I appreciate it. All right, Ross, you want to go ahead and make a comment real quick regarding all this?
Hey, Mayor. Yeah, Keith, you had mentioned that the developer wasn't getting back to you with some of the questions that you had, other residents. Feel free to email me those questions and I will do my best to get those answers from the developer. Again, we are in the process of a submittal from them, but I will make sure that any questions that any residents have are answered and I can share those with you. So my email can be found on the website. You can reach out to me. Any resident can. Cody and I are the ones that are working directly with the developer right now. So we can get some of those answers for you.
Thank you, Ross. And hopefully, Keith, you send those to Ross and we'll try to get all those answered for you as well, okay?
Thank you. I was just wondering if the developer kept saying he would get back to us.
Yeah.
And we were just wondering how he was going to get back to us.
Yep.
And Ross, do you have that information on how he'd be getting back to us? I know you were on the meeting.
What I'll do, just so you know too, the meeting was recorded and it was distributed to all the council members. So some of them that maybe couldn't make the meeting, they do have that recording. So, but if you guys email me questions, I will get answers from them and then I can distribute them back to you and then you can distribute them to the residents or whoever's kind of taking the lead on your end.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, moving on with the agenda here. Items 5A through 5I. Is there any council members wanting to pull any items for separate consideration? I see none. I'm looking for a motion and a second to approve 5A through 5I. Alderwoman Miller,
I'll make that motion to approve consent agenda 5A through 5I.
thank you. Alderman Schaefer,
I second it.
Thank you. Discussion on any of these items? Clerk, please call the roll.
Alderwoman Miller,
Yes.
Alderman Schaefer,
Yes.
Alderman Glad,
Yes.
Alderman Santee,
Yes.
Alderman Mahavik,
Yes.
Alderman Devine,
Yes.
Alderman Harding.
Yes.
Thank you, council. Next item on the agenda is individual action items, which we have none for this evening. And then discussion item 7A is a presentation to discussion regarding proposed fiscal year 21-22 budget for the general fund operating departments, recreation center fund, water fund, sewer fund, and utility fund. I'll go ahead and hand it over to our city administrator, Derek Moorfield.
Thank you, Mayor. I appreciate it. Monty, can you let me share my screen, please? Maybe I already can.
You should be able to. The settings say anybody can share their screen.
All right, is that coming up at all?
No.
All right, let me flip it back over here. Let me exit out of this. Sorry about that. This. All right, can you see that?
No.
Anything yet?
No, might be because of the dual screens.
I was just gonna say, I think that
And I'll make you a host to see if it helps too.
Yeah, sorry about that, Monty.
That's all right.
Or I just do this. Yes, no?
No.
All right, one more time. Share screen.
There you go.
There we go. All right. Sorry, everybody. So I got a couple of things working here, so I may not be looking at the camera all the time. I apologize for that, just because I want to make sure I reference everything. But thanks for the opportunity to present this portion of the budget, at least proposed budget, to City Council and the public tonight. And as council is familiar with previous years, typically what we do is we break up the budget presentation and discussion into two sections. And the first one that we're doing tonight is a presentation, a discussion, an opportunity for questions, clarifications, et cetera, on all of basically the general fund, water, sewer, recreation center, and then we look at the general fund capital projects. And so really it's all the funds that comprise the operations of the municipality. So the funds that we're discussing tonight really funds all the different departments and all the the people, the services that we provide, et cetera. So that's the discussion tonight. And then what we'll do is take any comments, go back and make any adjustments to it. Then we come back to council. We have 44, 45 different funds just for people's information that run the city of McHenry in terms of different accounts that money is in. And so what we'll do is we'll go back and finish those up based on this discussion, bring it back to council in April. And then based on that, then we'll finish it up with narratives, package it all together, and bring it to council at the annual meeting for consideration and approval. So that just kind of lays out where we're at, and we're really at the starting process for discussing the budget. So tonight we're going to add one more thing to that discussion, and that is review of how COVID has impacted the current budget that we're in, 2021. And we usually don't talk too much about recaps or reviews of previous year's budgets, except when we look at budget versus estimated revenues and expenditures through the end of the year. But this year, because of COVID, I thought it was important to do kind of a high level review of where we're at and where we anticipate ending up based on the impact of the pandemic on the municipal budget. And then we'll drill down into FY 21-22. That's the fiscal year we're in right now, general fund revenues and expenditures. I'm sorry, we're in 2021. We'll review all that, then we'll get into 21-22 revenues and expenditures and proposed revenues and expenditures also, along, like we said, with the recreation center budget, water sewer fund, and the general fund capital equipment projects, capital improvement and equipment projects. Just a summary again of where we're at with COVID-19. A year ago, as council recalls, we sat on a Zoom meeting, I think, similar to this one, and you would receive the budget from us. We received word that that mitigations were going to go into effect and that there was going to be some impacts on our budget. We had no way of knowing what those impacts were going to be sitting here a year ago. Obviously, we didn't know that we'd go through months of different mitigation levels, that portion segments of the economy would be shut down. We didn't know how long it was going to go on. We didn't know, what type of stores or businesses were going to be able to be open and closed and at what capacities. And so again, just thinking back through the past year and everything we've been through in terms of not knowing where we were going to be a year on today, there was really no way to know what the impact was going to be on the budget at that time. We recommended as staff and city council was supportive of this recommendation to approve the budget as we had put it together. As council is aware, and for the public that's on here, it takes quite a few months to put the budget together number wise. Overall, we have about a $24 million general fund budget, and then obviously we have water, sewer, and other funds as part of that also that make up over a $40 million total municipal budget. And to go back and try to guess at what the impacts would be on a pandemic that had just started, they would be just that, guesses. And the initial estimates, though, were that we could see as much as 10 to 20% losses in general fund revenues. And based on our general fund budget, at least that was proposed last year, that would equate to anywhere between $2.5 and $5 million revenue impact on our budget. Again, based on a $24 million general fund budget. So anywhere between $2.5 and $5 million hit. The good news is, and it is good news, and that's what I wanted to be able to share right off the bat with council, is that based on what we see for revenues through the end of the year, that and it's only $1.1 million, but it's certainly not 5 or 10% or 10 or 20%. We're looking to be about $1.1 million short in our revenues for this fiscal year, and that is about 4.7%. So less than the 10 to 20% amount that we anticipated. To make that better news, as council knows, back a couple of months ago, we received about a $1.11 million Cures Act funding grant from the feds that were able to be used to offset a portion of police personnel costs during the pandemic. And so at the end of the day, our revenues are going to end up being about $43,000 under the budgeted amount this year, which is less than 1%. In fact, it's around 0.1% is where we're going to end up at. And so certainly not the 10 to 20%, the 4.7%. Yes, that was still an impact. Fortunately, with the Cures Act funding, it's going to bring us to about $43,000 short. So from a revenue standpoint, certainly good news there. And we'll drill down a little bit more into these numbers as we get into the estimated amounts through the end of the year. Are there any questions that council has so far just on that information? Again, that's a pretty high level review. I can't see anybody, Wayne, so if anybody raises their hand, just let me know.
Yeah, I don't see anyone.
All right, we'll go on to expenditures. So as council again is aware, we committed at that meeting as staff and soon afterwards to take action to freeze, defer, reduce, eliminate expenditures. And we identified about $1.4 million in operating and capital expenditures that were included in the budget the council approved last April, basically. And that $1.4 million included about $583,000 in personnel costs that through public works and community development, reorganizations and attrition of staff. Police deferred the hiring of officers that council approved for hiring. They deferred that hiring, and about $900,000 in capital and contractual and supply expenditures also. And the overall results of those actions and the fact that as staff, we watched spending through the rest of the year, or have watched spending through the rest of the year, is that our overall expenditures, including the capital costs that we incurred this year, are about $1.9 million less than budgeted. So again, if you go back a screen and look at their revenues were 1.15 less, or we're anticipating them to end the year 1.15 less. We also reduced expenditures by about $1.9 million. So an additional $800,000 over the revenue shortage that we are going to see. We've reduced from the budget. That's about 7.6%. Budget expenditures, including capital, as council may remember, we were going to use about $740,000 of fund balance to be able to fund capital projects last year. But through a combination of estimated revenues, the CURES Act funding that we got, and then the $1.9 million in expenditure reductions that I just talked about, we'll actually see a net increase in the general fund balance by $1.1 million. So again, it's about a $1.8, $1.9 million swing between using $740,000 of the fund balance and actually adding to the fund balance by $1.1 million. And again, I'll drill down into those numbers here in a couple of minutes. That's just the high level. And again, the good news is that revenues did not come in as impactful, short as we thought that they would be. We were able to get the CURES funding, which helped offset some police costs, police personnel costs, and we reduced expenditures by 7.6%. So we're able to, end the year. We're anticipating ending the year pretty well without the huge impact on our general fund budget that we thought we would have. Any questions on those expenditures before I move on? And again, we'll get into these here in a second.
Alderman Schaefer, go ahead.
Go ahead, Jeff.
Derek, what would it have been if we didn't receive the CURES Act funding?
Yeah, so that goes back to this screen. So it would have been this 1.158 million. All right. So we would have been about 5% short of revenues if we had not gotten that $1.13 million in CURES Act.
And was that 10 to 20% level we had talked about back then, that was prior to knowing there was going to be any funding from anyone?
Yeah, those were the numbers that IML, the Illinois Municipal League, sent out. Around this time, or maybe the end of the month, right when the pandemic was coming on, and IML was trying to make some predictions on knowing that most municipalities do their budgets in March and April for a May start. The Illinois Municipal League tried to put out, some sort of estimates for us to be able to adjust budgets, or at least have some clue on what the potential impact was going to be. And so, again, because we, as staff and city council, because we typically run an extremely conservative revenue and expenditure budget for the general fund, we were trying to plan for that worst case scenario if there was a 10 or 20% loss. And again, as council knows, we tried to keep you up to date throughout the year as we saw, at least quarterly, as we ran the numbers on revenues and expenditures to let you know where we were at. And Carolyn, you can correct me here. I'm just gonna if I get the numbers too far off, but in the summer, when we were at the low of the pandemic in terms of shutdowns, there was a quarter where we were actually about 14% under revenues. And so looking to make additional, reductions, et cetera. And then, through the mitigations, we were able to open stuff up. The video gaming started again. Restaurants were able to reopen it to some extent. And we actually were able to make up some of those numbers in the last couple of quarters. So there wasn't a time when we were actually at 14% of under revenues. Is that close, Carolyn?
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah.
Mostly like March, April, May is when we definitely saw closer to a 14% when we were truly shut down.
When did we get that funding? Like, when did it actually hit from a timing standpoint?
October, November?
After the summer or before the summer?
4 months.
No, it was after the summer. It didn't come out till October, November. That's just my.
Yeah, October, we received it.
Yeah.
Derek?
Good, Jeff?
Thank you. Yep.
Derek? Yeah, this 1.13, basically the cures money would basically, is that not from the declaration of local emergency declarations that we made? And that's why we received some of that?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that's right, Andy. Right, if we had council not, and I don't know why you wouldn't have, but had council not continuously made those declarations of emergency or approved those through the process, I believe that we would not have been eligible for that money.
Right. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, good. All right, so we'll drill down a little bit into these. So the next thing, this is where we typically start our discussions, is in a look at the budgeted versus estimated general fund revenues and expenditures. And I always try to put pages on here. Again, in the supplement the council got, there's about a 20-page memorandum that identifies all of this. And I always try to put the page numbers on there so council or the public can reference those pages as part of the discussion. So what we want to focus on, this is the very first spreadsheet. I added the colors on here, the green and the blue, but this is the very first spreadsheet after the memo and the agenda supplement. And so this is what we'll base quite a bit of this early discussion on in terms of estimated and proposed revenues and expenditures and the general fund balance. So if council wants to take a look at this, I'll go, and look at this sheet in your packet. I will throw some narrative up here, some discussion points, and I can always go back to this if we need to. But the first thing we're going to take a look at is the blue and green comparison columns, which are FY 2021 budgeted in the blue compared to estimated year-end revenues. We'll take a look at the revenues first. So typically what we do, I say this every year just because I would wonder how this happens and how we do this. So obviously the year isn't over yet. It doesn't end, our fiscal year doesn't end until April 30th. So how are we able to take a look at what our revenues or expenditures are going to be for 12 months if we don't know what those are? So basically what we do when we're doing the budget is we take 9 or 10 months of actual expenditures. We try to project out through the rest of the year, through the remaining 3 or 4 months or 2 or 3 months. And that's why they're estimated revenues and expenditures. Now, some things that's not true for, like property taxes, like we get all of our property taxes in a couple of installments. And so those aren't monthly revenues that we get or quarterly revenues that we get. But that's how we do our projections for revenues and expenditures. Just taking a look at those two columns, if you look at the column P and Q next to each other, the most significant revenue shortfalls for this year that we're anticipating are state sales tax being about $125,000 less than budgeted, local sales tax at about $184,000 less than budgeted, video gaming about $171,000 less, fines and forfeitures, about 165. Charges for services, 328, and interest income at 120,000. So the total of all of those is about $1.3 million less in revenues. Just in those, certainly if you look at all of those, certainly there's some that didn't hit the numbers, and that's what comprises that total shortfall amount that I identified earlier. But these are the big ones. These are the big 5 or 6 where the revenues we saw a drop off during this year. And then obviously the most significant estimated increase is in the reimbursement line item, which I believe is line 23 on that chart. And that reflects the $1.1 million in Cures Act funding that we received. And again, Andy, to your point, and Jeff, to yours, without the Cures funding, we would be that $1.156 million short, or about 4.7%. With the Cures funding, we're $43,000 short, which is about 1/10 of 1%. Any questions on that? So that's the budget versus estimated through the end of the year revenues.
Derek, we're looking at loss in sales tax. I'm sure a lot of it has to do with the internet, correct? Internet sales?
Well, yeah, I mean, this is Derek's opinion on that now. So it's not, I'm not basing it on any hard facts or data, but my input to that or feedback for that would be that this certainly changed people's spending habits during those months of the lockdown, where there was a lot more Amazon purchases, a lot more online stuff, and obviously people couldn't go to stores for a certain extent. So I would certainly think that maybe some people, I mean, I did, got goods through other means instead of at our stores locally. So that could be part of the drop off. So sure, yeah, some online sales would certainly have impacted that.
Now, online sales, I mean, they collect sales tax, Illinois sales tax. However, there is no mechanism at this point in time for internet sales to capture city sales tax, correct?
Carolyn?
Correct. They are working on that. It just hasn't started yet.
Yeah.
Okay. When you're saying they're working at it, who's they?
Well, they're
down in Springfield or?
correct. It has been passed that I just don't know the exact date of when that is going into effect. And it's different based on how big of a company you are and where your company is based. And there's a lot of rules on if you have to collect local or not.
Okay. Now, is this hard fact that it's something like that's going to go through, or is that something that Mayor Wayne Jett needs to bring to the Council of Governments, and we have a collaboration of all the municipalities in the area to lobby to make sure that something like this happens?
I believe it's already been passed
Yeah.
to some extent, especially for the Amazons, the big companies.
Yeah.
So in other words, it is something that is going to be moving forward.
Correct.
So we'll see a little bit of a light in the tunnel, and maybe not completely, but something as far as with this.
Yeah,
Yes.
it'll certainly be a plus for us, that's for sure.
Let's make it a double plus. Thank you.
Right, 2 pluses. All right, anything else on those? So now we'll look at the budget versus proposed. So again, it's the same spreadsheet. I highlighted the column in blue, which is the FY 2021, so the current budgeted revenues that we're under. And then in the green, the proposed budget for 21-22. And so right off the bat, you can see that that we're proposing about $500,000 less. That's that number down here, 500,000. And again, being conservative, right? We don't want to assume that all of our revenues are going to go back to normal because we're not back to normal yet. So we're estimating some drop off of revenues. But again, a lot of these numbers we get from the Illinois Municipal League. We don't just take a stab at state sales tax or local sales tax or state income. Certainly we look at the historical numbers, which is all these columns before that. But we also get estimates from the IML that we're able to use to plug in to a lot of these, not a lot, but some of the major revenue sources, especially the sales tax, state income tax, telecommunications tax. You know, the big ones, we get input from that organization to be able to make these estimates. So looking ahead for 21-22, and again, this is pages 6 and 8 of your 6 through 8 of your memo. They're proposed at about $520,000 or 2.1% lower than the 2021 budget. The most significant reductions include local sales tax at about $225,000, video gaming at about $50,000 less. It's interesting, if you go back, just as a side note, and look at video gaming on row 17 here, we budgeted $600,000, and obviously when the mitigations did not permit video gaming, we were way down for a long time. And now that some of the mitigations, especially on video gaming, have been lifted, that number is coming up. So while we're still going to end the year about $170,000 short, we've seen an upswing on that. So feel confident in that 550 number as a budget amount for next year. Again, reductions in fines and forfeitures, charges for services, reimbursements, and interest income. So some of the same line item or items that we saw decreases this year, we're going to anticipate through next year. Interestingly, though, some increases that we're anticipating is in state sales tax by about $142,000 and state income tax by about $159,000. And those specifically are numbers or estimates that we get from the Illinois Municipal League to be able to plug into our budget. And so we feel pretty confident in those numbers. One thing that we'll talk about later, but I want to mention here, is the need to continue to monitor local government distributive fund, the LGDF, which is basically the state money, obviously money that we get from the state. The governor has proposed that, and this has happened before, for those of you that have been around for the last 10 or 15 years, every 3 or 4 years, the state threatens to reduce our LGDF by some percentage, and then wrangling happens and it doesn't actually get reduced. But this one's actually in the governor's proposed budget. And what that would mean to us is about a $300,000 reduction in our general fund. And again, we'll talk more about that later, but I just wanted to bring it up now. So any questions on any of the revenues, either estimated through the end of the year? I'll put this back up. Estimated through the end of the year, column Q, or the proposed amount for 21-22. We can come back if there's anybody thinks of anything.
There's nothing there.
Okay. So now we will get into expenditures. So again, we'll use the same spreadsheet, but we're going to jump down here to the bottom now under the expenditures tab. And we're going to again use column P, which is the budgeted expenditures that were approved for 2021, and then estimates through the end of the fiscal year. Again, pages 8 and 9 of the memo, columns P and Q on that spreadsheet that I just had up. Just as a reminder, general fund expenditures include all personnel, contractual, supply, internal fund transfers. It funds capital improvement and capital equipment costs that are related to the functions of the city, other than water, sewer, and utility, and the recreation center. Those are all enterprise or business funds. So again, water, sewer rates and base fees are what go to pay for the operations and capital improvements and equipment of water, sewer, and the memberships and other things that people pay for at the rec center is what pays for the operations over there. And again, we'll talk about those separately today also. So total expenditures, as identified earlier, including the capital projects that we spent money on this year, are estimated about $1.9 million lower than budgeted, or 7.6%. If you pull the capital out, the capital number out of that, we were able to reduce operating expenditures at about $1.36 million. So I identified that earlier right off the bat where we were able to reduce general fund expenditures by about $1.4 million. So this is how we did that. We were able to reduce personnel expenditures by about 580. Again, through some retirements that we had, through some reorganizations. Troy worked hard over at Public Works to really take a look at their operation and do some reorganization over there. Community development had a couple of retirements, and then again, deferred hirings of approved positions in the police department. Contractual expenditures, we've kept it about $350,000 lower than the budgeted amount, which is about 15.5%. Supplies expenditures at about $278,000 lower, or 28%. And then again, we deferred capital expenditures. We deferred about $578,000 of capital expenditures this year. I did note on here that, you know, again, while we deferred projects, it doesn't mean that they're not needed. And so many of those have been rebudgeted and are being reproposed for FY 21-22. We deferred the expenditures until we saw where we were going to be at budget wise. So again, that's a review of, again, a broad review of expenditures that we're estimating through the end of the fiscal year. Does anybody have any questions on any of those?
Derek, we're talking about reduction in capital and all that, but what about as far as services? How much of a hit are we taking as far as services on this?
Based on through the end of the year, budget wise, where we're at, I would say none. I mean, now Troy could correct me or Ross or Carolyn, but I don't think in fact, I know there's no service drop off, you know, that we've seen based on the impacts of COVID.
Also, Carolyn, I know it was getting alarming to see, I think at one time within the last year or two, we were talking on budgets, personnel and all their retirements and everything else. We were at what, about 76% of our budget. Is that going down any? I hope it is as far as, you know, that it isn't climbing any, that we are. And I'm not saying that you're going to see a dramatic drop, but I would think, especially considering again that replacing some personnel as we've had them retire or whatever, that we see that percentage drop because needless to say, our percentage of cost to run the city as far as personnel got so high that we really were struggling as far as for capital projects and projects that are needed as far as dollars.
Yeah, remember, go ahead, Carolyn.
Yeah, for 21-22, the budgeted, we are at only 69%, so it is going down.
Oh, okay, great. I didn't expect you to have a number like that. Great. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.
Mayor?
Yep. Sorry, Jeff.
Yep, go ahead, Jeff.
Derek, do you guys happen to know what was our annual budget amendment figure so far for this year? You got that number?
I don't have that right in front of me. I can get it.
That would be great. You don't have to do it right now. Just wondering how that was and how that impacted things. I mean, obviously you can see how it impacted things, but just like to know what that total number was.
And typically, again, and what we'll do is we can come up with a list of what the budget amendments were for and which fund they came out of, because I think that would be helpful for council. But, you know, again, remember, we didn't change the budget that went to council last year. Obviously we deferred a lot of things and all that, which would not have required a budget amendment to implement. If I had the list in front of me, it would be an easier discussion, but we can get it to you. The things we brought before council were not things that we anticipated and that's why they weren't in the budget. I mean, we try to put things in the budget when we anticipate them. And so things that we bring before council are typically things that we don't anticipate that we need to bring based on our policies for budget amendments. But that's a good question, Jeff, because I know we have done quite a few this year. A lot of them based on being able to respond to COVID. But we'll get that list together and get it to you and do it by fund too, so you can see.
That would be great. Thank you.
You're welcome. Anybody have anything else on estimated expenditures through the end of the year? On to proposed, again, same spreadsheet. Column P is the budgeted amount, column R as the proposed amount. And pages 9 to 10 of your memo. And again, looking at columns P and R as the comparables. So the proposed operating expenditures are overall $145,000 or about 0.5% lower than the budgeted expenditures that we're under right now. However, it's a little bit misleading because that also includes some of the capital stuff. So if we just look at it by breakdown of those items, personnel expenditures, as Carolyn mentioned, are going down. Those are we're reducing personnel costs by about $1.5 million or 8.6%. A lot of that, as council will recall, is due to how we deal with the police pension fund. Because now that is basically a bond payment that we make every year, and how that's taken care of and all that is done different. It's done as a transfer instead of coming out of the personnel line items. However, I did identify that we had retirements, we had unfilled positions, we've had some reorganization, so certainly some of those costs come through that also. But overall, it's good, right? The personnel expenditures are being reduced by $1.5 million. Contractual expenditures by about $159,000 or 7% lower. Supplies, not much, but still a little bit higher, about 1% higher. And then transfers about quite a bit higher again, as I just mentioned, because of the transfer for the police pension bond issuance. And just as a reminder that the reason that we did that is to be able to basically lock in a cost that's similar or the same for each year. If you look back, even the 10 years since I've been here, I think we were around 1.2 or $1.3 million in the police pension costs. And that's up, over $2 million or had been going into this budget year. And the reason that we bonded that is to be able to, pay it over time and lock in a cost that's around the same amount every year instead of seeing the escalation. And those are given to us through actuarial analysis. And that's our commitment to meet that funding need by 2040 or 2050, whatever the number is now. With capital outlay included, proposed expenditures are $62,725 or 0.5% higher than the amount budgeted in the current year. This will result, and we'll talk about this in a minute when we get into the general fund balance, of utilizing $1.3 million of general fund balance, which seems like a lot of general fund balance. But remember, this year we were planning on using $744,000 of the general fund balance for capital projects. And we were actually able to flip that. So instead of using 744, we're actually adding $1.1 million to the general fund balance. And because we deferred projects from last year and didn't do them, we are suggesting or recommending implementing those projects in 21-22. And therefore the need to use about $1.3 million of general fund balance. But again, I'll break that down here for you further when we get into general fund projects. Questions on proposed expenditures?
Mayor, Derek, it's Vic.
Go ahead, Vic.
Deferred, do you have a number for the deferred expenses or budgeted programs from last year that you're going to be requesting for next year?
Yeah, that's when we get into the slides and we get into the capital projects, I can give you that dollar amount. I think it's around $600,000, right, Carolyn? I remember right. So overall, the good news is overall, we always try to bring council as staff a balanced operating budget. And so if you take, the capital outlay expenditures never allows you to have a balanced budget because there's always more projects than there are revenues for. So that's why we need fund balance to be able to finish them. But if you pull the capital projects out, look at revenues and then just operating expenditures of the city, you can see the difference of 24,178, 23,992. And so we actually have a budget that is balanced in the general fund at this time of $185,799. That's always a win when you can propose a budget that's in the black. And given the fact that we've just been through a year of unknowns, that we're able to still put together a budget that can be balanced. So I'm as an administrator, I'm happy with that amount. Are there any questions on any of that stuff that I went through in terms of estimated, proposed? We're going to get into, again, we're going to get into water, sewer, recreation, capital projects here in a couple of minutes, but I just wanted to make sure there were no other questions on any of that information. That's a lot, I know.
Hey, Derek.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, through this whole last year, have we at any time dipped into our reserves for operation?
No.
I think, and again, it probably isn't for a discussion tonight, but maybe we need to review. Do we need quite as much money as we put on aside for reserves? How much more of an impact to the city than what we've seen with COVID could we wind up having that we would need all these reserves sitting there on the side?
Well, our fund balance and reserve policy is 120 days that we have in writing. We're between 90 and 120 days right now. We're proposing to be right in the ballpark there. Actually, our fund balance and reserve policy says that if you go below 120 days, you're good. You just have to watch it. If you go below 90 days, and you actually have to come up with a plan to replace the funds to get above the 90 days. So right now we're in that middle ground where we're above 90, not at 120. But had we actually taken a 10 to 20% hit, and that would last, I mean, let's just say that every year was going to be a 10 or 20% hit to our revenues, that would go by pretty fast. That would be gone pretty fast, that money. I mean, remember, that's only 3 months of operating expenditures for the city.
Okay, so if we're talking 120 days then, or we don't have 120 days, then we have dipped into the reserves somewhat.
No, we're just below. Yeah, over the years, if you go back and look at this spreadsheet, that's not the fund balance one. Let me get to the fund.
Is it basically because of the fact that as the revenues and the expenditures go up, the amount of reserves haven't gone up as fast? Is that what you're saying?
It has a direct impact on how many capital projects we do every year and how much of the fund balance we use for those capital projects. So we always approve. Since I've been here, we've always had a balanced general fund budget, revenues to operating expenditures. And then remember the $50 million list of capital improvement projects that we have. Depends on how many capital improvement projects we do every year. So if you look across this line right here, 39, look at the capital outlay one where we're using, $1 million here, $1 million here, 1.3 million here. It all depends on how many capital projects we do. And that affects how much we have to dip into the fund balance. But if you look at where the fund balance was at up here, back here on 43, back in 14, 15, then we did some big capital projects. I mean, we used $3 million that year to do road program. and we didn't do a $3 million road program, but we used quite a bit of that $3 million was a road program, which reduced the fund balance. So this last row here is where the historically where the fund balance has been, and then where it's at now. So you can see budgeted for this year to go all the way down, we were budgeted to use 744 and to end the year at $6.2 million. But because of COVID, we didn't use that 744. We made a bunch of expenditure cuts and our revenues didn't take as much of a hit. And so we're actually adding $1.1 million to the fund balance, so we'll be here. But now, next year, we're proposing to spend $1.3 million, right, or $1.5 million in capital projects, and that'll draw down the fund balance by 1.3 million, and we'll end at 6.8. So you'll see we've kind of gone up and down in terms of being over 120 days, not being at 90. We're kind of in that area between 90 and 120 days. The industry recommendation, and by industry I mean the Government Finance Officers Association, recommends between 90 and 120 days of fund balance for unforeseen things that could happen, like a pandemic.
Okay, so we have dipped into it. I mean, like you said, it fluctuates. Okay, so it isn't like it's sat there and it's never been touched.
Right, that's exactly right. And yeah, exactly.
Now that makes more sense. Thank you.
Yep. So pages 12 to 15 of your memo are a breakdown of all the general fund operating department budgets. And typically what I do at this point is ask if there's any, so what those include is admin, finance, economic development, community development. It's parks, but not the recreation department, parks and recreation, but not the rec center. I'm sorry. It is police. It's the dispatch. Actually, dispatch is handled separately. That's more like a business fund too, but it includes those operating departments. And I provided the spreadsheets for those. Does anybody have any questions on any of those spreadsheets? We typically don't go through line item by line item on them. But if anybody has a question on any of those, most of them is a general comment. If you look at those, the bottom right-hand corner to most of those, I'll just pull up. I don't know what this one is. I'll just pull it up. So this one is actually I'll pull up this one, human resources. So if you look at the bottom right-hand corner, you can see the difference basically between the variance this year. So that's a 2.6% increase overall in their budget. A lot of them had decreases. Like if you look at finance, community development was actually a 7.7% decrease in their budget. So overall, they stayed pretty close to that. If it's an increase, it's 2 or 3%, but most of them saw decreases in their bottom line.
Alderman Schaefer has a question. Go ahead.
All right.
Hey, Derek, since we don't have the finance committee meetings anymore, one thing that I always thought was helpful and maybe would be for everybody, but what you just described as the variance percentage,
yeah,
can you, without going line item to line item, but can you highlight the ones that may have the largest increases and the ones that have the largest decreases, and then hit on the points as to why?
So I'll go back to this spreadsheet, first of all, to start that conversation. So if you look, so everything on those operating department spreadsheets basically can be lumped under these personnel, contractual, supplies, other capital outlay, and transfers. All right, all the line items on those operating department spreadsheets fit within one of those line items. So to quickly answer your question, overall, if you look at all the operating departments, you can see here, again, personnel down 8.6, contractual down 7, supplies up overall. And again, that's $13,000 over all those operating departments, right? Not just one, not just human resources or admin. That's all those departments put together. Other is down 7, and Carolyn can describe other. Capital outlay, again, we're doing capital projects this year compared to last year or the current year that we're in. So that number is going to go up. And then the transfer number again went up quite a bit because of the police pension and how that's dealt with through a bond payment now. So as a broad answer to your question, this is where we saw pluses and minuses overall, department wise. Yeah. Carolyn?
I just was thinking that instead of going through all those individual pages, you could highlight something like that off those individual pages. But however you want to do it is fine. I just know that kind of summarizes it for everybody.
Yeah, Carolyn, do you have anything to add to that?
I mean, I can do that. I can go through the departments and kind of highlight if that's what everybody is interested in.
Yeah, we can take a look at it.
I can
Chief,
comment
go
on the
ahead.
police. I can
Go ahead,
comment on
Chief.
the police real quick. The two biggest factors for the police were health insurance costs and our contractuals went up. As council remembers, they approved a 3-year lease to own program to upgrade our radio system last year. And next fiscal year is the first year, that first payment. So that was a $51,000 increase to our contractuals. And we normally have about a $96,000 contractual balance. So that's the largest increase we see there. And then health insurance costs went up. And what we're seeing and talking, I don't think Ann is on, but maybe Carolyn can talk to it too, is that we're seeing a lot of employees, especially on the police department side, switch from what once was single coverage to either single plus spouse or single plus because they're adding children to their family. And so the cost of that insurance on both the employee side and the city side is an increase as well. Those are the two that stand out. Most of our other ones are very nominal. They're either up or down a couple $1,000s.
Yeah, for health insurance, when we first put this budget together, we were looking at close to a 10 to 12% increase for our health insurance. But actually, when I redo all of these sheets for our next meeting, we're looking at more of a 6% increase. So that's going to be a decent savings that you guys will all see on the next batch of sheets that go out, that all of the departments will have a much lower health insurance increase, because that is probably the biggest increase on almost all of the department's personnel costs. For personnel costs, I guess I can just highlight in general administration, we did add one position for building maintenance. So that's for personnel, I believe, is the only increase other than health insurance that you'll see across the board on all of the departments.
Yeah, I guess the other thing too, Jeff, is we'll go through there and you'll see like here's that's a bad one because that's you guys, right? So that's the elected officials. But if you look at community development, anything in parentheses or decreases to their budgets. So this is the 21-22 proposed, and the first shaded column is the budget variance. So everything, if it's in parentheses, it's a decrease in 21-22 compared to where we're at the budgeted amount for 2021. And so you can see, like in this example of community development, there's quite a few. They reduced their budget by $76,000. Now, again, they had a couple of retirements.
Right, that's got to be personnel when you get a number like that.
Yep, exactly. And so their overall is down, 6.7%. You go through.
Right.
So,
I get it, Derek. I was just going back to my Steve Murgatroyd days where when we sit in budget meetings for 6 hours and then we do this for 3 hours. But that summary of stuff was mainly for the whole council to just kind of get a flavor for it. So,
and I would say
that's good.
that if anyone has, if you go back through these and a council member has a question on any specific line item or a budget that they want an answer on any of those line items, just shoot Carolyn and I an email and we'll get your response on it. We'll send it out to the whole council, the response.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff. On to the recreation center. And again, we'll come back to capital improvement projects at the end. As I mentioned early on, the rec center is a business fund or an entrepreneur fund. And so for those council members, Jeff, Vic, Andy, that were around when we put the recreation center together, FY 21-22 is actually, it's just, it seems impossible to me, represents the fourth full budget year for the recreation center. It opened February 29th of 2016. And the goal from the beginning of staff and council was to be able to build the membership base there in order to be able to have not only have the center be operationally balanced, to be able to, you know, pay the people that work there, pay the overhead costs and all that, but also pay the debt service on the construction loan. And if you recall, this is just, again, general numbers, but we put half down and we bonded half because we didn't want to spend everything in the recreation center fund. And so we did bond an amount. So we have a bond payment every year for that. So that was the goal up front. And I remember the discussions of, well, that fund balance may have to be used in the first couple of years to pay operating costs because we're going to have to build the membership. You know, that's going to have to come over time, that membership, you know, is built, that we put the programs together, that we're able to turn a profit on the rec center. So that's why we decided to keep some in the bank in order to be able to fill that void. However, again, as council knows, we had 800 people on a waiting list to be members before we even opened the doors over there. And every year so far, from year one through last year, the recreation center has more than paid for itself. It's not only paid all the operating and overhead costs of the facility, but it's also paid the debt service on it, and it was actually able in some years to put money away back into the recreation center fund account also. And so we were, you know, extremely thrilled, obviously, that it could be that successful that fast. I think at one point, Bill, you're on, I think at one point we had over 2,000 members.
We were close to 2,500. We had over 2,400 members at our highest point.
There you go. And that
which honestly, I will tell you that that's more than we should have here. That's from the size of facility we have.
Thanks. And so obviously that was pre-COVID that we had 2,500 members. Then COVID hit, mitigations kicked in, and we had to severely limit the use of the facility. I mean, there was a time where literally it wasn't able to be fully utilized at all. And based on all that, membership is either been put on hold by people or is just down. The 2021 revenues, this fourth bullet point, are estimated to be about $337,000 or 43% less than the budgeted amount. Operating expenditures, we also made reductions, or we did make reductions to operating expenditures. Those are reduced by about $150,000. And next year revenues are proposed at 576, which is about $200,000 or 25%, 26% reduction in revenues that we're proposing for next year. And expenditures are proposed at 540, 542, or about 5.5% less than 2021. You know, again, we have to remember, or I have to remember that when we talk about the recreation center, that we have to make sure that, you know, it's just like any business, we have to make sure that there's staffing there in order to be able to serve the clientele that are there. And so it's not a direct result of, you know, well, you know, we're going to reduce staff by 50%, because you still need people there at 5 o'clock in the morning to open the door and man the staff the counter and watch the workout room and provide all the services that are supposed to be provided over there. So we have to make sure that, you know, that while we're reducing expenditures, that it's not to a point where now all of a sudden members are coming back on board and we have no staff to be able to serve them, or we have to go back out and rehire or hire staff to fill those positions. So it's a balancing act of expenditures in terms of operation of the facility. And at the end of the day, in order to balance the recreation center budget for 2021, we're going to need to use $170,000 of the fund balance. And then in 21-22, $157,000. That's not just for the operating costs, that's also to pay the debt service. And the debt service is about what, $130,000, $136,000 a year.
$38,000.
Yeah. So mostly those amounts are needed to be able to pay the debt service amount for the bond on the facility. Again, it's coming out of the recreation center fund balance right now, not the general fund balance. But at the end of next year, 2021, assuming that if membership doesn't kick back up again, the fund balance will be depleted to about $92,000. So at the end of 21-22, April 30th of 22, there'll be $92,000 left in the recreation center fund balance. That being said, Bill and I have had discussions, and Carolyn, and I know Bill's working on it already to bring members back now that some of the mitigations are lessened. I mean, I know I look over there and see the parking lot full a lot of the times of the day. And so we hope to be able to bring back membership to a level that, when we have this discussion next year, we can say, we've made some reductions, we made some adjustments, but we focused on getting members back in the door and providing quality services to them. And membership's now at a level where it's paying for 100% of the operating costs and the debt service, and we don't have to use that fund balance anymore, and we can start adding back to it again. Bill, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, just a couple of things that I wanted to add. Aside from the COVID, crisis, the pandemic that we dealt with this year and navigated, I think, to the best of our ability, maintaining some services for our members in our community. At one point, when we were closed down, we had opened that up, and even our community could get those classes for free. The other thing we navigated was the introduction of Planet Fitness into the market, which obviously was a huge hit for us too. All in all, I think and the numbers don't totally show that, but what you don't see in those numbers is that strictly because of the pandemic, we have over 300 members that are not comfortable right now. We have a large senior population, and a lot of people have put those memberships on hold out of an abundance of precaution. And so we have a plan working towards navigating them or off of being on hold in a time that we feel is the best time to do so, rather than force them to come off before they're completely comfortable. We'd rather do all that we can to work with those members. And so when you see, you're looking at the worst case scenario, knowing that there's 300 members that are hanging out there that we'll have to make a decision on here, I would say within the next 6 months, that will have a significant impact on our revenues for sure. Even if we had half of those, it's a huge impact for us. So what you're looking at right here is the worst case scenario. And then again, as we get more comfortable and people are more comfortable, and we're already starting to see that here. It's been some good signs, and Derek pointed that out, but you are starting to see classes that are full, and even the fitness center that the numbers are growing. So that comfort level is returning slowly. That's what we expected to return slowly, and we'll keep working towards that, as well as increase some of our marketing efforts.
Thanks, Bill. Any questions by council on recreation center budget?
Hey, Bill. Yeah, how many years are we looking at, do you think, before those bonds are paid out?
Well, it's a 20-year bond. Unless we decide, if we start making some revenue, or if we ever hit a point where we said we want to take some, like when we initially created the recreation center fund, it was a portion of the parks developer donations. That could be an option where you say, all right, we'll dedicate some of this and pay that off sooner than we anticipated, rather than carrying that the whole 20 years.
Yeah, just to kind of refresh everybody's memory of the fact that this rec center was going to be built in phases, and we really weren't going to go into the next phase until it's paid off. But there's no way to escalate the payment. I'm just looking at, you look at gas prices going up, you look at minimum wage going to go up, everything, all costs are going to go up. And, which means that if we ever went out for another bond for the next phase, it's going to be a lot more money. And the sooner that we can do that, needless to say, the more reasonable price for the next phase. And unfortunately, though, as we do the next phase, that isn't going to add percentage-wise the same revenue as what we get for the health center, correct?
Correct. It would not. Based on
Yeah.
everything, all the studies that we did leading into the referendum, we know that, the engine is the fitness center. That's the biggest revenue driver we're going to see. Well, we will see revenue from those other phases, but it's not to the extent that of the fitness center impact.
Okay, thank you.
Carolyn, do you know how much we owe? Do you have a number on the bond? About?
Got to be like 1.6 in
Yeah.
that range, 1.6 million.
We still almost own 2 million on that.
Carolyn, that's not the number I was looking for.
I know. Sorry.
Wrong answer, Carolyn. There you go. All right, any other questions for Bill or I or Carolyn on the recreation center? Not ideal, but we were able to position ourselves. Again, council made the decisions, and we worked together on this to at least have the foresight that, we were able to have that fund balance to pay to get through this pandemic. Otherwise, the discussion would be, do we use general fund balance to be able to offset those costs, or what do we do to make it work? And so at least the recreation center at this time has money in their fund balance to be able to pay those costs, hopefully to get over this little hump here so we can get back to.
It's a big hump. Anybody that could have foreseen this, they
Right.
should start a business, making some forecasting models.
Yeah, right. All right, thanks, Bill.
Thank you.
And then these are the spreadsheets for the recreation center. So the same thing, these are the numbers that I went through, Jeff, to your point on variances. Again, everything in the negatives here, this is the revenues. You can see annual memberships, they're from the budget. We were running 18-19, our revenue just for annual memberships was $730,000. And then $500,000, 600,000 before that. And so we were in that 550 range with a growing facility. And this is where we're at, half of that basically estimated for this year based on the impacts of the pandemic. So we can't go back in and plug 550 as much as I'd like to plug 550 back into that proposed annual memberships number. We need to be conservative about it. Look at the impacts of COVID, of memberships coming back gradually. And again, we like to think that this number will end up way higher, but we can't, we just don't want to plan that way. That's not the way we do our budgeting. Otherwise, we'll be off again next year. And then from an expenditure standpoint, you can look through and see where we made reductions. Again, everything in parentheses are reductions all the way down to the bottom. And then here, the fund balance, you can see, we drew down a little this year. We actually added some to the fund balance in whatever year that was. We added $13,000 to it. So this just shows the trajectory or the decline, I guess, of the fund balance.
That second year, the $231,000, that's the year that we built the parking lot. We
Yep.
added on the $500,000 parking lot. So
That's
when you
right
take
here.
that capital project out of it, the $400,000 for the parking lot, you take that out of it, and we were, $200,000 in the black.
Yeah, that's up here. That 416 is the parking lot amount. So again, you add 416 to this 231 and we'd be 200,000 ahead that year. Water and sewer fund, again,
Eric?
yes, sorry.
Before we end the rec center, if I can ask Bill just a question. The 272, the estimated revenues that we have for this year, how many members do we have right now with almost a year in COVID conditions?
Active memberships that we have, not on hold, are real close to 1,200. We're like 1,174, I think. And like I said, we have over 300 of those that are on hold, 300 additional that are on hold. So that's a significant portion, a quarter of our memberships on hold right now.
Okay, thank you.
And I asked you this, I think, last week, Bill. So I'll just ask you again here. What's kind of the membership sweet spot for revenues expenditures and capacity over there?
If you asked me exactly that, I would say probably 1,800.
Yeah.
1,800 would really be the ideal from when you look at the space and you look at the classes and what we offer and what revenue that would bring in. That would be ideal right in there. But obviously, I'd love for us to be 1,500 right now. That would put us in really good shape. So
Okay.
we'll just keep working back towards that. I'm confident in what we offer and what we can offer to our community and how we can get there.
Yeah, and we'll make sure, just like we do with our quarterly budget report that Carolyn puts together for council and for the public, we'll make sure that we keep council. This year we kept them pretty regular because of COVID. This upcoming year, 21, 22, we'll continue to watch those revenues and expenditures and all funds and make sure we update council on where we're at with all those based on our recovery here. Water sewer fund, as I mentioned this earlier, again, it's an enterprise business type fund. It funds operating and capital costs related to water and sewer systems. And division wise, that's water, sewer, wastewater division, utility maintenance, and then capital projects and equipment of the existing system, for the water and sewer. Again, I mentioned this too, revenues are derived directly from water and sewer sales. So rates that residents and businesses pay for water and sewer, base charges, connection fees, and any service penalties that may be imposed. And then obviously consumption of water impacts revenues. Usage goes down, revenues goes down, usage up, revenues increase. As a reminder, again, some council members weren't around then. In 15 and 16, we did a fee and capital base fee study and implemented some new fees back in 15, 16. And the commitment back then was to annually review our rate and base fees to make sure that based on the operating costs and capital costs as part of the budget, to be able to make any adjustments annually to fees to be able to pay those operating and capital costs. Previous to that, I'm kind of having flashbacks, but previous to that, we basically went out and we said, "Oh, what are other communities doing? Are raising theirs by 2%, 5%, or whatever? Or how much are we behind? We need to increase them 10%." I mean, I remember there were a couple of years, I think either early on or in the late 2000s, the 2008s and 9s, where we had substantial rate increases to be able to add to the fund. But now that's based on what the operating and capital budgets are for water, sewer, and utility. And then we look at how the rates can fund those budgets. From a proposed expenditure standpoint, the water division proposes, and that's not 35%, that's a 0.35, so less than a 0.5% increase to their operating budget. The sewer division expenditures are proposed to decrease by 2.5%, and utility division expenditures are proposed to decrease also by about 2.5% decrease. To remind council, there were no sewer rate and water rate adjustments last year. When we had this discussion as part of last year's budget, COVID was new. Our suggestion at the time, staff-wise, was to, we usually make that decision in August or in the summer. And at that time it was, let's take a look at where we're at pandemic-wise and decide what we want to do about it. We as staff we left the rates as they were for all of last year. And but based on where we're at, even with the decreases, where we're at from an operating standpoint and the needs that we have for maintenance of the water and sewer system, the existing system, our recommendation is that we increase water rates from the existing 354 to 382 per 1,000 gallons, and sewer from 4 to 420. And just to kind of put some more meaning into what that is in terms of usage, below that, if you use the average family, depending on size, uses between 5 and 10,000 gallons a billing period. So what that means is it would go from $17.70 to $19.10 for 5,000 gallons of usage, or $1.40. That's at 5,000. So if you're using 10,000, it's $2.80. And sewer from $20 to $21 for 5,000 gallons, which is $1. Or if you're using 10,000 gallons, $2. So again, I just wanted to monetize it because sometimes looking at just the rate difference isn't really impactful or meaningful. So I thought it would be more beneficial to provide what that means in terms of a bill for residents based on usage. So that would be our recommendation this year. We were able to not be able to, or not have to do the increase last year. And through some of the adjustments we made and reorganization, and really Troy made through reorganization and divisions and all that, we're not that much worse off at this point than we were last year in terms of rates. We're not falling behind a huge amount. But if we don't do something, to be honest, if we don't do something with the rates next year, 21, 22, then we'd be looking at higher increases in years after that. And so we just, again, honestly throwing it out there, a recommendation to make increases to rates. Questions on water sewer or comments on the rates?
Derek, it's Vic. Mayor, it's Vic. I would, I understand and see the foresight in regards to looking at those rate increases coming up and the need for this division to potentially move forward with that. Thank you.
Thanks. Thanks, Vic.
Sure.
Sure.
Yeah. Now, all right, we're talking rate increases here, but of course, a large part of our water and sewer bill is paying off the bonds for the expansion. But we have two debt services out there, do we not?
Yeah.
Did we have one that was $6 and then, of course, the large one after?
Yes. Go ahead, Carolyn.
Yeah, we have two debt service fees. Let me look when the first one will.
Every year I ask Carolyn when the $6 one is
I
up.
think I would remember.
That's the question.
2029.
2029.
Okay, so we still got 8 years. Okay. By that time, it's not even going to probably change the rate increase if we get a high inflation. But at least it'll be one more thing that we can take off the bills. Thank you.
Right, and then the other one, obviously, that was for the early wastewater plant consolidation, and then obviously there's the other one, which it was for the completion of that project for the payment of the state loan that we got to be able to finish that project.
Yeah, it was more the expansion itself, where the first one was just for the trunk lines, from what I read.
Right. Yep, that's exactly right. That's exactly right. Thanks for the question. Any other comments or input on the fees? Carolyn, when would we bring those back to council for August usually, right?
I think they go into effect in August, so we'd have to do it in June or July.
Okay. All right. And again, these are the spreadsheets, just like the other ones. So again, looking through these, you can see this is the water sewer fund. This is water. And so you can see, sales were down from a revenue standpoint. Interest income was down. So about 6% less in revenues. Expenditures, everything in parentheses were reductions. This is the sewer fund. Again, revenues down because it's directly related to the water usage. And that actually saw, from an overall standpoint, you saw that they reduced contractual services, reduced supplies by quite a bit. So again, just like the rest of our budgets, Troy did a really good job, and his superintendents, who I think are all on the line here tonight too, did a really good job at really taking a look at what our needs were, doing some reorganization over there for efficiency sake and some cost saving sake too. General fund capital projects, I've talked about these a couple of times, pages 18 and 19. We're getting to the end here of the discussion, by the way. General fund capital projects. So just as a reminder, and we can all celebrate this, as a reminder, the local streets projects are now funded mostly through the motor fuel tax fund, although there's still some that are included with the streets budget, but the majority come through the motor fuel tax. So next year, we're going to have more than a $2.1 million local street program, and that's 1.5 million in MFT, $600,000 in Illinois bond funds, and then $525,000 that's in the public works streets operating budget. So about a over a $2.6 million local streets program. Andy, we always said we get more than $2 million. So there you go. We threw that out there. First time.
Well, again, we're looking at 2.2, I believe was what we were told, but 2.2 puts us right back where we would be right now in another 6 or 7 years. So still need to keep looking for more funding, but hey, it was a big step. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah. It's better than the 800,000 that we were doing early on. Those are not general fund projects. Those are funded through those other funds as I identified. For general fund projects, we have $580,000 in parking lot improvements. Those include a couple of downtown lots with a focus on Main Street. The recommendation is to make improvements to the Main Street upper and lower lots. If you've been by the Parks Garage and Knox Park East, those are in pretty rough shape, and it includes improvements to those also. $250,000 for police locker room expansion. I can let the chief talk a little bit about this, but the short story is that we don't have sufficient locker room space for the diversity of the staff that we have, and need to make some expansion to the locker rooms. $45,000 in police vehicle and equipment. So while we buy vehicles through the bonds, if you remember last year, we took out a bond for our vehicle replacements. It used to be a battle in the capital improvement and capital equipment budget. There used to be a battle between streets and vehicles and everything else. Well, streets are out of there now because they're funded through MFT and in this case, Illinois bond funds. Vehicles are out of that because we bonded for vehicles last year to be able to buy those. But the bond doesn't pay for equipment. So like cages and lights that go on the police vehicles. So those money still has to come out of the general fund. And then a Parks ball field machine for maintenance of obviously of the ball fields. The one that they have now is on its last leg. So that's a total of $905,000 in new projects. Vic, I think you asked me earlier, right, about carryover projects.
Yes.
About $608,000 in carryover projects, and I can show you what some of those are in a second. But the total of those, the 905 and 608, is about $1.5 million in general fund capital projects. So again, that's just general fund projects. Overall, in all the funds, we're looking at about $6.5 million in capital projects. And just so you could see, this may be too small for you to make out, but there's really no way I could get it all on one screen and be able to read it. This is a breakdown by fund. So while tonight we're really just talking about the general fund and water sewer, and I mentioned the motor fuel tax, these are all the funds that have capital projects in them. And so you can see that there's general fund projects, IT projects, developer donations. That's typically parks improvement projects, Peterson Farm improvements, water sewer projects, water sewer capacity, the TIF, the motor fuel tax, which shows the local road program. And then anything that says rebudget are projects that were identified for last year, but deferred to some future date, and we're including them for this upcoming year. So you can see that whole list there. And I can send this out to council so you can read it better. And it doesn't show up very well on here. Any questions on capital projects? Just some other topics. We hit on a couple of these, but I just wanted to make sure I re-highlighted them. I mentioned the LGDF reduction. Again, it's in the governor's budget right now. IML Illinois Municipal League is working on all of our behalfs to oppose that reduction. The governor is saying that we can make that money up by collecting what we're supposed to collect through corporate taxes and, all those sorts of things. But the bottom line is that when you give something up, especially the local government distributive fund, when you give it up, the chances are you're never going to get it back. And so, the talk is to reducing the amount we get by 10%, which, $300,000 doesn't sound like a ton of money in a $24 million general fund budget, but that's, that's some projects every year. And over time, that'll add up to a lot of money. I mean, 10 years, that's $3 million. So that $300,000 hit will add up. So we'll continue to watch that and see where it's going to go in the budget. That would take effect, I think, right away, right, Carolyn?
It would be with their budget year, so it would start in July.
No, July, right, in July. So if that happens, then we'll come back to council and have that discussion on whether or not we're going to see that $300,000 hit, whether it's going to be made up in other. I mean, we'll be a couple months into our budget. We'll be a quarter into our budget by then. So we'll be able to look at our other revenues and see where they're performing and whether or not we need to make any adjustments to our budget based on that. A couple of council members, Jeff, I know I talked to you about it. Vic, maybe I've talked to you about it too. And we've had discussions here internally about, and I talked to the mayor about reduced or waived liquor license fees for 21-22. So just the short analysis on that is this. So there is a total of 39 Class A, so bar and table liquor licenses, and those licenses are currently they're $1,500 a piece, which generate about $58,585 in revenues to the city. Class B table only, there's 20 licenses at $800 a piece, so that brings in about $16,000. Class C is package only, so again, like Jewel, Walgreens, there's 23 licenses at $1,100, so that's $25,300. So the total of those three are about $99,800, $100,000 in liquor license fees that we would bring in 21-22 as part of that general fund revenues. All right. So right now that 99.8 is included in that. So I know we talked internally and I talked to the mayor and just conversations about whether or not we do any reduction of those fees and what that impact would be on our budget. But just some things to keep in mind as we think about that. Most Class Cs were open during the shutdowns and selling packaged alcohol. So I don't know, from my standpoint, I don't know that I would recommend that we do, if we're going to do any reductions, that we do reductions to Class Cs, because again, they were able to sell packaged alcohol during that time. Also, many bars and restaurants, so many of the Class A's and Class B's received grants either through the feds, through the county, through us, over the time of the pandemic. Some of those are loans that they're repaying back. Some of them are grants that they just got, again, to fill the void, fill the gap during that time. And so we would have to take a look at that and see where they're at on either repayments or what they received from us money wise, or the feds or the county. And then the bottom line is, we're talking $1,500 for Class A and $800 for a Class B. Will that really have an impact to their bottom line by deferring liquor license fees for next year? So I guess I just kind of throw it out there right now as a discussion item. We don't necessarily have to make a decision or give us direction on it tonight. Maybe it's something you ponder and we talk about the next time through. Just remember that even if we choose to deal with the Class A and B, that's about $70,000, $74,000. And right now we're 185,000 in the black. So that would reduce that 185 by $74,000 in terms of revenues over expenditures. So I guess I throw it out there. Any initial thoughts or comments on that from anybody?
Derek, I've taken, when I leave work, I'll go through the parking lot on my way to the car, and I'm amazed sometimes that I'll pick up a penny here, a nickel there, a quarter there, all those pennies, nickels, dimes and quarters, they all add up. I've got a little Bears bank that I throw them in, and we could say, oh, we're going to save how much here or how much there, 100,000 here, 300,000 there. Before you know it, you're talking another $1 million or $2 that we really have to be very careful of. There's so many things in the city as far as infrastructure and everything else that we need. And again, we don't know with inflation what that's going to hit us in the future either. So I think we need to be very cautious as far as cutting anything, as far as any kind of revenues.
Hey, Derek,
Alderman
this is
Miller.
Jeff.
Oh, go ahead, Jeff.
Can we get that information you were talking about for A and B obviously we know who got grants or loans from us, but is that other information available?
Yeah, so part of the eligibility for we did our kind of our local city grants early on last year. There weren't grants, those were loans. And then we received about $300,000 from the feds and state too, to be able to do some actual loans grants, relatively recently. And some weren't eligible for those because they had received other funding. And I think we have access or the ability to see who's received what for the most part. So we can take a look at that. Doug or Carolyn, do you have any input on that? I know Doug did quite a bit of that when we did the round of grants from the 300,000 we got from the state.
Yeah, if they got the big grant, we can find that. I know the county had their own grant. Doug maybe he knows, but I don't have a list of those, but I know the big grant we can get if they.
Yeah, we can find out a lot of them.
Okay, so we'll get that out to you, Jeff.
Because my point there is, and I don't know if we could do this, but if we could get that information, I don't know if you could make this only for those certain people who didn't get anything kind of a thing, but that's where I was going with that questioning. So.
Okay.
I think that research, and Doug, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but with talking to these businesses, the only ones that didn't or wasn't able to get any funding was businesses that started before February 2020, right?
Yeah.
Before,
right.
So that was the Hidden Pearl.
Right.
One. That
So
wasn't able to get any
basically everybody got something is what you're saying, Mayor?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
A lot of the businesses.
A lot of them,
did
except
get
the
something.
ones. Hidden Pearl is the one that just definitely stands out. Doug, is there any others? I really think that's the only one with a liquor license.
The one
Corner Tap.
Corner Tap, yeah.
Yep,
Right.
those two.
Right. And probably Miller's Diner, right? Because they
Correct.
Yeah, so. But we'll find that. We can get it out to you, Jeff. I mean, it should be relatively easy to throw, something together just to let you know.
Right now, they're all gonna have to pay for a new 4th, 5th, 6th machine. So.
Sure. Right.
Well,
they'll only pay a portion of it, and then the company will pay the rest of it. So hopefully.
And
Alderman Miller, go ahead. Sorry, Vic. Alderman Miller, go ahead.
Yeah, so my only addition to that conversation is in conversations I've had with business owners, particularly bars, restaurants, is they're not opposed to paying for the liquor license, but it's a cash flow problem as they're just coming back online. They're paying for supplies, they're paying for personnel. Maybe instead of just saying we're waiving it, which again, I agree with Alderman Glab that if we're doing okay and people are recovering, I don't know that we should waive it, but maybe come up with a payment plan where they're not having to write the big check all at once. I don't have that option, but to me, the conversation with the business people has been more about keeping the checkbook flush because it's been red or not flush for a year. And they'd like to get some reserves built up as they're having to rebuild their businesses. So that's my only addition to the conversation.
Thanks, Sue. Monty has done a great job. And he's on here about, I'll give him all the accolades on this. Monty has done a great job working with businesses over the last year to, work out payment plans on fees. And I think as long as he knows, we know, and he knows that there's the support there to, work that out with businesses on payment plans or whatever, then he can work with them individually to make it work. So I appreciate that input.
Yeah, Monty's done a really good job with that.
Last topic. This is
Alderman Santee.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yep.
No, thank you, Mayor. Real quick on that one bullet, the second to last bullet point. Yeah, I wanted to make sure, following up on Alderman Schaefer in regards to, hey, did they get their money? Yes or no? Whether it's us, county, state, federal, whatever, to make sure we do, they did receive that. And then understand that, believe it or not, there is a handful of businesses out there that, no one can prepare themselves for what happened, but because of how they ran their business and the way they funded their business, they were able to batten down the hatches and just roll with the punches on their own as an individual company, be able to get through this and reopen and start bringing their people back. And I do applaud those ones also, but I do appreciate Alderman Schaefer bringing up that point, because I just wanted to make sure that if we were looking at potentially decreasing, any fees or paying them out, like Alderwoman Miller mentioned, over a given period of time, a longer stretch of time, that they did receive that money, whether it be loans or grants. Thank you.
Thanks, Vic. The last thing on here is, really more good news, although it's still pretty new. So we're waiting on some technical guidance on it. You may have heard that I think the end of last week, the president signed the American Rescue Plan Act of 2021. And basically what that did is make $1.9 trillion available to different levels of local governments, states, et cetera, to help recover impacts of the pandemic. The information that we received as of today is that the city of McHenry is set to receive about $3.34 million of that. It's based on a formula that the feds put together, but we've been tracking it through our state legislators and through the IML also. And we get the same information from both of them. I think the mayor gets stuff through the mayor's caucus, and we get it through council of governments also. So they're all jiving together with the same information. And basically what happens is that once it is signed and put into place, that we should get half of that money within 60 days, with the remaining 50% of the money outside of 12 months. So a year or more from when we receive the first payment, but still in a timely manner, supposedly. And again, we're still waiting on some technical insight for what exactly we can use the money for, but the broad categories right now that have been identified are to respond to the pandemic and its negative impacts, including assistance to households, small businesses, nonprofits, tourism, travel, hospitality. I'm not sure what premium pay to eligible workers performing essential work during the pandemic means. So that's one of those that we need some input on. Provision of government services to the extent of the reduction in revenue due to the pandemic. So in this case, an example would be that we showed early on in the presentation that our revenues were down $1.158 million. Based from the budget, based on the pandemic impact. So that to me is an example of that one. And then to make any necessary investments in water, sewer, and broadband infrastructure. It does not say streets. It's water, sewer, and broadband. And then the other caveat to it that I didn't put on here is that all expenses need to be incurred by no later than December 31st, 2024. So at least it's out a couple of years. to be able to plan and utilize the money. But right now, I'm just throwing it out there as that it's money that we're going to be receiving. I hesitate to give any recommendation on, uses for it or anything like that until we actually, first of all, know that we're going to get a check, that it actually shows up. And then secondly, until we clarify, what exactly it can be used for, so that we don't get the cart before the horse in terms of making plans for using the money. We know that it cannot be used for offsetting any tax cuts that were made after March 3rd of this year, or it can't be deposited into a pension fund. So we couldn't have used it to put it towards the police pension, drawing down the police pension fund debt that we have, or payment that we have. So I just threw that out there because we just found out some more about it today. Any questions on that?
Derek, it's Vic. That last statement about the pension fund, is that for any and all municipalities, whatever their size is?
Yes. There's different levels of how municipalities are getting money. There's like the over 50,000, under 50,000. I only pay attention to the ones that have to do with us, with our size community. I don't care what Chicago's rules are, but what applies to municipalities our size are these items so far: eligible and ineligible uses.
Thank you.
Welcome. So that's that. We're through. That was kind of a the presentation of general fund, water, sewer, recreations fund, and capital improvement proposed budgets to this point. What would happen after this tonight's meeting is that we can take some of the input that we received tonight, or take the input received tonight, make any modifications to operating budgets based on our discussion. And again, it's not an approval tonight. We just presented the information. We update those operating budgets, and then we actually put together all the other funds. So for example, we have an audit fund, we have an annexation fund, we have a debt service fund. There's 44 or 45 different funds that aren't directly related to operations of the city. But we finish putting together all the, because a lot of those are funded through interfund transfers. So now that we know we're at least on the right track with the general fund and water, sewer, and capital funds, we can finish those up. We then send those back to council, or give those back to you for another discussion like this one on April 5th. So that packet, you'll get this information back, plus all the other funds to be able to take a look at. We'll identify any changes that we've made to operating funds. So the ones we talked about tonight, we'll identify any changes. One example is Carolyn talked about the health insurance cost, that in here it's higher because we had a higher number going into it. So we'll revise that health insurance number. We'll identify for you prior to that meeting what impact that's had to these operating budgets. But the focus for that meeting, April 5th, will be to discuss the budget overall, but specifically the new funds or the other funds of the budget. And then what we do is we take all of that information, we put the entire budget together, the narratives, all of these fund sheets. This fund is an FUND, not FUN, fund sheets, and all the supplemental information. We package it as a final budget and get it to you for review prior to the annual meeting, which is April 19th, which is when we typically then approve or adopt the budget for start on May 1st. Any other comments, questions? I wanted to thank you. I don't think I did it enough at the beginning. It goes without saying that this past year has been tough for a lot of us personally and professionally, but the support the council gave to the staff right up front when we were sitting at this meeting last year, when as staff, we were like, wow, like we just put this huge budget together and now what are we going to do with it? Because we have no idea how to change it or how to modify it to what the pandemic could be. And council, gave their support to us this time last year to be able to watch it, monitor it, make adjustments that were made, understand that we didn't know what we didn't know. We didn't know what impact the pandemic would have. And, that to me as the administrator, that action alone, your support and trust in our professional ability to look at the budget, look at the revenues, continue to monitor them and to adjust expenditures, based on what we're seeing from a day to day and a week to week and a month to month basis. I can't tell you how much that is appreciated by not only myself, but all the directors and everybody else that, deals with budgets here at the city, that, that support and trust in us has really meant a lot. So I just wanted to say thank you, and that I appreciate that. We appreciate that. And now if there's any other questions, we'll answer any more. Thank you.
All right. I don't see any. I also want to thank Derek and Carolyn for putting this all together, and you guys have done a hell of a job, honestly. Keeping our finances in check. And to all the directors, great job. I can't thank you enough for putting all the hard work. One specifically is Troy Strange. He knocked it out of the park, did a heck of a job for the city of McHenry. And so Troy, thank you from all of us for making those cuts and putting us in the black. So thank you. Moving on for staff reports. Is there any staff reports? I see none. Mayor's report, I have none. City council comments. Alderman Schaefer.
Just wanted to get any updates and reports on how things went this weekend from everybody. Chief mainly.
Sure, I can give you a little bit of an update, but I'm still waiting for my after action reports from the shift supervisors. So we saw some large crowds this weekend. We made no arrests. We did have some calls for service. And again, I won't have after action reports on the Saturday and Sunday details probably until Wednesday or Thursday this week from the event supervisors. But I did get some summaries. So we did have Green Street was busier than Riverside Drive. We did have a few calls for service that were tied to some establishments on Riverside Drive and a few calls for service that were tied to some establishments on Green Street as well. But without waiting to see those actual after action reports, I wouldn't want to comment on which businesses they were or weren't tied to at this point. But I will be prepared to give you guys an email follow-up on how that went and any recommendations that the event supervisors had reference it. It was busy. Saturday was I was out there myself earlier in the day with my family. It was extremely busy on Saturday. We had a really good day. We tried to do this open carry to promote some non-static event for some movement. And so that was accomplished on some avenues. There was a lot of foot traffic down the Riverwalk and the side streets, which promotes that. I think we would have seen a better spread if Bill would have been fortunate enough to get a liquor license to run the event at Miller Point. We would have diluted the crowd sizes even more. But again, we did not have any issues that resulted in any arrests at this time. We did have one person that was taken to a hospital from an injury on Green Street, but it was just a cut lip. So,
did anybody get any reports from the local businesses that had their own events? Has that been positive?
So I've talked to about 4 business owners personally. They knocked it out of the park. Their revenues were huge, to say the least.
There was a lot of activity everywhere. Even Wind Hill had a band and a large crowd on their property as well. Just they thought outside the box themselves to make a good outside event as well.
Just from my side, I would just add that well, first and foremost, that we have a medalist here amongst us. Troy Strange won his age group of the Shamrock Shuffle, so a little something for him. Congratulations, Troy. But even like that aspect, we had 300 runners for the Shamrock Shuffle. Went really smoothly. That transitioned well into the river dying, where if you were walking down there, you just saw tons of families, which was so good to see, whether that was on Pearl Street Bridge or on Miller Point or on the Riverwalk. really a lot of families that were out early for the event. And, a lot of them that you kind of get that gist that they're not from McHenry, when they say, well, as they're talking to somebody, you can kind of get those clues. Well, you got to walk down this way. And I think this is over here, just from verbal clues that it was nice to see that crowd out. And it just as well, the movement kind of throughout. I kind of made that loop a couple of times through, the whole down Pearl Street to Green Street, Riverwalk to Riverside Drive. And such a good feel for that event early and even into the early afternoon. And just a good activity. A lot of people, people smiling. It was good to see people out. Couldn't have better weather, that's for sure, to have a 60-degree day. And even for to have like Gambler to be able to open up and kind of reintroduce themselves to the community. I know that the bar wasn't open on Saturday, but with new owners and essentially a new business coming to town, it was nice that we're able to make some accommodations for them as well.
Alderman Glenn.
Yeah, I want to bring up a couple statements that were made at the public session. And basically, we're talking about residents that feel they're not getting the answers. I sat in at that meeting on the phone, and I was kind of amazed how many times nobody could answer or didn't want to answer certain questions. Some of them I felt they couldn't answer because of the fact that without engineering and everything else, what they would propose. And even with the engineer, before they did the soil borings and everything else, it may not even be a viable project there if the soils aren't good enough. But anyway, I'd like to see where we set up something where community development sets up a list of questions that are given to them from residents for this and what answers we find for them so that the council can stay aware of it and use it as a spreadsheet so that you could add on to it and just send it back out to us once a week with just kind of an update constantly so that we always have all the questions and what the answers were for all these residents. I think it would be good for as far as information for the entire council.
Can I jump in real quick?
Go ahead.
So right now, I know that a lot of elected officials have been receiving questions from residents, and I don't have copies of those. So Monty, I don't know if we can get with you to where I get, because that's kind of, when residents reach out to the elected officials, that's kind of a private one-on-one conversation. I'm not copied in on those. I have had a few questions from residents, Cody and I, but not a whole lot other than what was mentioned in the meeting. But I have been in contact with Keith already tonight by email, and he's going to go ahead and forward some questions to us. So I'll keep tallies of that and make sure that council is aware of the communication back and forth between residents.
I just think it'd be nice to have a complete list of all the questions and what the answers are. And if we don't have an answer, again, like I said, without it, total engineering and everything else, the developer may not be able to give us everything. But I know in that meeting, there were some answers that were questionable as far as the fact that they didn't know, but then all of a sudden they did, and I'm not going to get into the whole thing, and we don't want to, deliberate on it tonight. All I'm saying is it would be nice for council to have an updated list of what the questions are, what the answers are that we can give them, or what isn't available yet, and then just put it on just like a spreadsheet type thing to where you keep adding to it every week and send it out with an updated version every week. I think it would be, just like I said, good information, because this seems to be a very hot topic right now in the city of McHenry.
I will put something together for us.
Thank you.
Alderman Schaefer.
Thank you. Yeah, I agree with Andy too. I've obviously gotten a lot, and I know if you guys go back and listen or watch that video, Ross and I kind of apologize for you on this, because Mr. Lang mentions staff and getting together with Ross a lot on his responses. So I'm assuming that information is going to be shared with you, or at least, it's it was on there. So, I mean, if we were playing a drinking game and every time they mentioned staff, we'd be all in trouble.
Right, so, I honestly, there's been very little communication with them since that meeting. Most of the communication that we've had with them is what our submittal process is and what the requirements are per our ordinance. So, again, I have nothing to review until we get that formal process, that formal submittal. We don't like to go back and forth with developers before they submit something because things get lost. And so we want a submittal with the filing fee as well. It's another, because we don't want to put a ton of effort in from a staff level when we don't have the filing fee to pay for the staff time. So, that's on its
Right.
way.
If they don't come back with something, I don't suspect you guys are going to put a lot of time into it. So, yeah. So, I mean, if they haven't been in contact with you, you really don't know where they're at.
Well, I know that they will be submitting. I'm confident of that, but we have relayed our concern about, the submittals and the residents' concerns with the access, to try and work with the site plan to maybe, not have that access on Almond. And I'm getting in a little bit more here, but after that meeting, that was my email to say, hey, look, try and expand on the site a little bit so that fire trucks can maneuver around, and the fire department's comfortable with it, to eliminate the Almond access. But I haven't heard anything back from them. So that's kind of where we stand right now.
Alderman Glenn.
Yeah.
Sorry, sir.
One thing from the first meeting that we had with discussion on this, and it's kind of come back now with research and everything else, and that's the fact that, like, I was amazed the fact that I don't know when or if it was a loophole missed years back, but like rental properties like that, apartment complexes don't need the masonry like multifamily does, whether it's the zoning or whatever it was that was mentioned. And I think we need to address those concerns of our town. Why is it that in Crystal Lake, they have, from what I saw online, as far as the type of masonry and balconies and everything else that they're building out there, and our ordinances won't call for any of that, and maybe we need to review it so that if the council were to decide on something like this, that we would have the best quality development that we possibly could get. And I just think we need to review our ordinances in a expeditious manner so that our ducks in a row. So if this thing does come forward, that at least we have a little bit more teeth. You've got to remember, and I can recall Attorney McCardle stating several years back the fact that we can't tie a approval of zoning as far as to any demands or negotiations as far as what the developer has to do. And once we give up that zoning, then they just stay within our ordinances and there's nothing we can really say or do about it. So I think we need to review those ordinances and see if we don't need to tighten those things up so that we, like I said, if this were to get approved down in the future or whatever development down in the future, that we get the best quality development that we possibly can for our city.
Alderman Miller.
Yeah, I just wanted to again, just add a little, I think it is important that we all collect the questions from the residents and make sure that the developer does answer them when they do their presentation to us. I've received several phone calls from residents with a wide variety of questions, from I don't want it to I'm not opposed to it, but I just don't like what they're presenting. So I think if we assembled a collection of those, which wouldn't take a lot of staff time, just somebody with maybe a word processor, just to make sure that when and if they come before us, we've gotten all the questions answered. I think it's imperative as we represent those residents, whether they're your ward or not your ward, that we know what's ultimately going to go in there. And I think the uncertainty of the answers is what the residents are really upset about. So Again, just to echo Ross's comments, if we're getting personal calls, I'm gonna go back to those and send him my notes so he knows what everyone's asking me. And I think it's imperative that we get that over to Continental so they're prepared to answer those questions. And I don't think that takes a lot of staff time to just put a list of questions together and organize them. But, you know, the residents are very upset about what they don't know, not necessarily what they do know. Other than there are a few that are just, I don't want it there. But the more information we can get them, I think the better off we will be in representing them. Thank you.
Thank you, Sue. Any other council comments? All right. I'm looking for a motion and a second to adjourn. Alderman Santi,
I will make that motion.
second. Alderman Glad.
Second.
Clerk, please call the roll.
Alderman Santi,
Yes.
Alderman Glad,
Yes.
Alderman Schaefer,
Yes.
Alderman Harding,
Yes.
Alderman Mahavik,
Yes.
Alderman Devine,
Yes.
Alderwoman Miller,
Yes.
Mayor Judd.
Yes. All right, everyone. Have a good evening. Thank you.
Good night.
Good night.
Night.